Welcome to the FNDN Series, your deep dive into startup compensation with industry leaders from across the startup world. Join me, Matt McFarlane, a people operations leader turned compensation specialist, as we uncover the strategies and practices driving success in tech startups around the world. Hear insights from heads of people, founders, and experts as we explore how to build robust compensation frameworks that not only fuel growth and retention, but do so in the dynamic startup environment that we all know and love. Let's get into it.
So funny. I always find these sorts of things, like a little preamble at the start we have each other. Like, we've got like 3 other conversations here that are probably helpful to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I wanted to ask you
Always
questions about your hat, but and where I could get one of those, because like I love repping Jurassic Park, but at the same time, the Chris Pratt movies have really irked me, and the latest.
Oh, really? Yeah.
The Jurassic World. I don't know if you watched the recent Jurassic movie.
I haven't. No, I saw that. I saw it on the plane actually. That it was. I saw it on the list of movies, and I saw that Scarlett Johansson was in it, and I was like, I found that really interesting because I would have thought of her as like an A-lister, and I feel like I don't know if Chris Pratt's in the new one or what, or if they've just like restarted, or so I was kind of like, oh, okay, interesting. Anyway, but no, I didn't. I haven't watched it, to be honest. I've never, even when I was a kid, I was never really a dinosaur person. I was more of an airplanes was me, jets and things like that. And, but yeah, never really got into Jurassic Park.
Damn. All right. We're finding things that we don't like about each other. And that's a good way to start a podcast.
That's a great way to start a podcast, which isn't about the topic of Jurassic Park. It's about the topic of burnout. And, it's funny, I was thinking about the intro to this when I was, it was probably when I was in the shower, because of course that's where everyone does their best thinking. And I was like,
don't say that next time.
Don't ask me what I was wearing. and I was like, oh, how do I introduce you, and like how we came to know of each other and all these sorts of things. And I was like, you know what? I feel like I spend a lot of time kind of shitting on LinkedIn a lot, and like the challenges that I have and the issues that I have with it. But like, for all of its problems, one of the things that it is quite good at is helping create connection, which is obviously what it's, one of its goals. And because obviously that's how we met one another, was through just engaging with one another's content. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, shout out, respect to LinkedIn for bringing us together and to talk about something that, graciously, you've said you'll share a little bit about your story and your sort of background and experience with, but I've certainly flirted with it. I think most people have had an experience with it, which is burnout. But maybe before we dive into that, do you want to spend just a little bit of time telling people who you are, a bit about your background, all that sort of stuff?
This is the part where I never plan, and I should have sat in the shower and I thought about this part. Yeah, so like, I am a software engineer by trade, and I have mostly worked in startups. Oh, I should probably say my name's Nav. Hello. Hi, audience. And I've mostly just been someone who has worked in tech for over a decade, mostly because I just wanted to build things. I wanted to do a startup. I was ingratiated by the great, ecosystem of startup entrepreneurs, and I just wanted to keep building. So I'm originally from Fiji, but I spent my entire childhood in Hawaii, hence I have a weird accent. There's a little bit of a mix of like Fijian, New Zealand, maybe Australian, I don't know. Like, I really have a lot of Australian friends here, and they sound insane, and a little bit American as well. So that's probably why if you pick up a little twang here or there, it's going to be like some offshoot, some residual effect.
Creating a whole new accent.
yeah, creating a whole new thing, like a dinosaur. Yeah, so I've just basically been in tech for a while. I have chronic depression, and I've dealt with anxiety for pretty much as long as I can define it. And I've sort of discovered while doing my own startup, like I did my own startup out of uni, and I rage in success, rage in success. Because there's no failure in a startup. There's only success. Remember that. And I did some agency work. I went through different verticals. I went through different domains. I did a little bit of front end, a little bit of back end, a little bit of cloud, a little bit of data engineering, and all these kinds of things. I've just been someone who's just kind of done whatever piqued my interest because I don't know. I guess this is kind of exciting. I don't even know if that's an introduction. It's just it's who I am, I think. It's who I am versus my resume, if that's better.
Well, I mean, it's always great in some respects that you don't plan this, and I think it's lovely that people actually get to hear whether you want to call it. I feel like I'd be rude to say ramblings, but your inner thoughts around like who am I, how would I describe myself? I think it's nice when that can be a little bit more raw rather than choreographed.
But I will give you the byline. The byline right now is that I'm a fractional CTO, fractional being part-time. If people don't know what that means, it's just another word for part-time. At Spoony, which is a neurodiversity, it's a platform, very intimate social media platform for people with chronic illness and neurodiversity. And we have sort of a journal component mixed in with a social media component. And we try to create a new vertical around basically healthy, safer social media.
Before we dive into sort of, your experience, and I think I might start by saying as well, like, this really is just about like, sharing your experience, sharing my experience, sharing our thoughts around like, I guess burnout and the role it plays and kind of how we can rid the world of it. It's not, you speaking on behalf of all developers. It's not me speaking on behalf of all HR practitioners. It's really just that, an experiential thing. But I feel like one of the places it might be good to start, and it feels kind of naff, but it's like, what is burnout and what isn't it? And kind of like your thoughts around that, because I feel like it's a term that people have become a lot more comfortable with, quite rightly. And I think that's helped with things like disclosure and identification and then, you're going to name the problem to solve it, those sorts of things. But I also wonder if sometimes with these sorts of topics, it goes too far the other way, where it's like, you waking up tired one morning isn't necessarily burnout from my perspective. But should we start there? And I'd love to hear from you, like, what is burnout to you and what isn't it? And what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of nuance to it, right? Because it's so relative to the person. When people say what is depression and what is chronic depression and what is clinical depression, I kind of like come to that a little bit. But, people have a bad time in a day, and then people have a prolonged bad time. People have this undercurrent of a bad time. And I look at burnout as that. It's a prolonged undercurrent that is always there. And maybe not always there, but it's certainly not there on a particular Monday. It's not a Garfield Monday. It's not a, oh God, it's the weekend and this is Friday. I just want it to end kind of burnout. It's something that you feel through the week and maybe even the weekend. And so I look at burnout as something that is always hanging over your head. And whether it's that feeling of like waking up in the morning being tired, are you waking up and feeling tired every day or on most days? Is it something where you're depleted of energy and you lost your interest in the work you do? Are you feeling anhedonic? Like, do you just have no desire to function at work? Like, absolutely no imperative to complete that task. And so without quantifying it as a singular sentence description, which I cannot do, for me, it is your battery is low and it continues to be low. And no matter how much you try to recharge it, it seems like it's constantly draining, like an old iPhone. Maybe that's a good way. It's an old iPhone with too many software updates.
Is it 1 or 2 years old that they got in trouble for artificially doing that, the planned obsolescence or something like that? So hopefully that's not the same gauge for humans. I'm tired after I was 2.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I think a career, like 2 years in a career can generally be enough, right? I've got a 6-year-old iPhone 11, and I get maybe like 3 hours out of it. So, in many ways, I'd be very happy to get 3 hours out of my work.
So it's a good metaphor for, I guess what I'm hearing is like, it's a prolonged thing. It's not just like you wake up one day and you're typing. It's like there's this undercurrent that you mentioned of like something is off, it affects you during work, it affects you potentially outside of work. When you think of like the symptoms and kind of how that shows up for people, and again, neither of us are doctors, but, leaning on our own experiences here, you mentioned there's kind of your battery's kind of flat or it drains quickly, those sorts of things. How has that shown up for you, or maybe when you've engaged with others that have had burnout, how have they described that from a real symptomatic perspective?
I might not be a doctor, but I have read Wikipedia, and I think that qualifies. Well, I think that qualifies me to be a doctor, and I've asked AI a variety of questions on this topic, so I am very qualified. I hope, should I have a sarcasm label? Please do that. Anyway, I'll give you an example of it. I think I was, a couple of years ago, I was at work, and I had this person who would often reach out to me for help, like a junior engineer, just sort of, hey, Nav, how do I do this? Hey, Nav, how do I do that? And usually I just answer with like, oh, check this article out, check this thing out. If you got 10 minutes, I can jump on a call with you right now. When I respond to that with a sigh, that's usually the start for me. And so what I'll find is that there are physical reactions I have to certain scenarios that normally wouldn't have occurred. Whether it's this little rage that I will feel for them reaching out to me, like this anger over like, why are you interrupting my time? I am so exhausted. I'm so tired. Go away. And so that's one thing, is definitely like the way I react at work or at home. I mean, either way. And the other aspect is how quickly I get to doing the work I'm doing. So as an example, I could usually find myself going into work and spending the first 30 minutes just like perusing my emails, looking at my tickets, maybe reading a few articles, and generally just jumping into it. But it just seems like it gets longer and longer and longer. And before you know it, I'm actually starting my work at 12 o'clock. So these are little tiny things that I consider maybe symptoms that sort of highlight, okay, you are either burnt out or you're reaching that stage of burnout.
Yeah, you're seeing like a little bit more like reluctance to do some of the things that you might have ordinarily done, more natively had you not been burned out. I'm curious, like, where do you think, or do you think there's a relationship between burnout and disengagement? Disengagement's a topic that comes up a lot in obviously in HR and people circles, and we measure it primarily through surveys and things like that. Do you think it's a case of something like, disengagement precedes burnout? Do you think it's they're separate things? Like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think it can be both. I hate that that's the answer, but it can be both, because from my perspective, and I've worked in a company where I am literally talking to customers because I am the first hire or the second hire, and only a team of like 3 engineers. So my job isn't to just write code, but it's actually to talk to people. And so I can see the effect of my decisions. I can see my code having an effect on someone's life or someone's business. And then I've been in a company where I am a cog in a wheel. I am one of 300 to 400, and I do not see, my work. I do not see it in the hands of the customer. So I will feel a level of disengagement there in that situation, in that sort of like ladder situation. And so in many ways, if you had to send me that survey there, I probably would be quite disengaged. But now let's flip the script. And if I'm in that early stage startup and I'm often engaged, my role is to be engaged, and you see a slow, disentanglement, then I think you're also seeing the other side of it, where I'm now just completely divorcing myself from the situation.
Yeah, nice. It's so, yeah, I guess, because I find it interesting, like some of the things you're hitting on there are like, there's like good, what you'd call performance, or performance culture practices, which is like, do I feel connected to my work? And if what I'm hearing is right, it's kind of like those are the things that tend to lead to disengagement. Like it may be a feeling that your work doesn't matter too much, but actually like some of the like more advanced signs that potentially could be a bit more symptomatic of burnout is actually like, yeah, I'm not that interested in kind of going outside of my kind of core role, my like, the box of my position and what it is that I need to do day to day to really help kind of the company take that next step, or, be more than maybe what I'm being paid to do, helping your employees, really going the extra mile on something and kind of gold plating it or polishing it or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's so dependent on the person, right? Because I've been a manager in a situation where I've had to work with someone who honestly they just saw their work as work, And I remember just saying like, you figured it out. I don't know how you've done it, but you figured it out. And in a situation like that, maybe you'd consider that sort of not engaged. Maybe you'd consider that as burnout. But really, I think they have a very healthy social life, a very healthy career, and so. It just really, and I hate that, but it really depends. It just so depends, because it depends on whether you're an early stage startup where you've hired people who are multidisciplined and are working with clients and customers, or it depends on whether you're in a team where your customers are actually your own engineers. So with the engineering teams, you'll usually have the separation of like infrastructure engineers. These are the folks who build the things for the other engineers to do. And so their engagement comes from the other engineers using their tools, providing them feedback. And if, for instance, there's a lot of errors, there's a lot of problems, or if there's no appreciation shown in company circles for the work of the infrastructure team, then you'll find that maybe they're going to get disengaged. So there is no absolute, and I wish there was, because if there was, then I think we would have solved this already. And yeah, there's so much nuance to it.
Yeah, I hear you. It's we've touched a bit on like, kind of what it looks like, what it shows up like, when it's maybe burnout versus disengagement, how it's maybe preceding burnout, things like that. What are the things that you think like catalyzing that for people? And I'm sure it can be myriad. I mean, I can share my own experience, and this is never like ever like diagnosed as clinical burnout or something like that. But I can certainly say that when I was at, my lowest in my career, and felt a lot of the things that you're talking about, it was because I was in a role where, like physically I was healthy, and I was, doing good exercise, and I was eating well and all sorts of things. It wasn't necessarily like a lifestyle thing. But I think for me, what I noticed in and of myself was that, a lot of what you're talking about, I was kind of like, just uninterested in being at my place of work. I was like not interested in, if I saw something that it would have taken 2 seconds to fix and make something better, I probably wasn't going to do it because, why should I try and help this workplace? And for me, it was driven a lot by this sense of just like, it was just hard to get shit done. And it was just really hard to do my job. It just felt like, whether it was a combination of ambivalence or like lack of clarity around what we were as a company and what my team's role was and our purpose and all those sorts of things. And I remember like the experience that really crystallized it for me was, I won't name names. I was working for a law firm, and I remember like they had a huge turnover onboarding, like early turnover issue. So people would come into the company, lawyers would come into the company, they would start ramping up into, their billable hours or whatever it was. And within 6 to 12 months, a lot of them would leave, have really high turnover rate. And now that is an obvious huge issue, if not for the reason that people that don't even want to spend 12 months in your workplace is a bad thing, but most of all because, like any, decent sort of company, most of those people had a ramp up period. So they wouldn't build their full rates and the hours that they were expected to do in a week until maybe after 6 months, something like that. So, they'd start with 0 billable expectations, and then after 6 months, they had full billable expectations. And so you can imagine that when a lot of people are leading in that sort of 6 to 12 month period, the cost of an employee is huge because they're not covering their own costs, let alone producing profit for the business. And so that was something that we tried to diagnose, and we tried to look at introducing a tool to help us solving it as part of the onboarding process. I think it was part of the selection and the onboarding process. And I can't even remember the details around what the tool cost and all that sort of stuff. But the ROI was so high on this thing if it could just achieve like a real slight improvement in the early stage turnover process. Then I thought, this is like the biggest slam dunk in the world. Like, we just have to keep a few more lawyers and this thing pays for itself in terms of the amount of money that they make just because they stay longer and they have more billable hours. And it just got knocked back. It was just like, yeah, nah, like, we're just not interested. Like, there wasn't any real like feedback. And so for me, that was such an obvious thing. And we as a profession get crucified all the time for not being commercial enough and not being, grounded in kind of the business needs and the commercial realities of the business. And here I was thinking, I've given you something that is shown that it will likely help us make more money, and yet it still can't even get approval, or it can't get across the line for us to implement. And I just remember that being kind of the final straw for me, where I was just like, it's actually one of the few times in my career where I've left a role without having another one. And this is maybe something else we can talk about, but it's like, I just felt like I'd been interviewing at the time, and I just felt like the toxicity and whether it was my burnout or my just severe disengagement or dislike of this place, it felt like it was bleeding through into interviews. And I actually reached a point where I was just like, I just got to leave. I just need to leave, and I need to get myself into a good headspace and go back to some of these companies that I'm interviewing with and be more me and not this person who's jaded and hates the world and stuff like that. But yeah, it was at the end of a really prolonged period of just like, not being able to do my job and just feeling like I was held up and spinning my wheels and treading water, all of those euphemisms. That for me was one of the moments in my career where I was just like, gosh, that was just a real slog. And yeah, all of the things that you mentioned. But anyway, that was a really long way of kind of sharing that one experience. But what are the things that you think, for the people that do experience burnout, or even just, yourself, what are the things that you think kick it off for?
First off, there's so many things that I wanted to say there in that entire
let's do that, and then you can. I didn't give you any space.
I'll sort of explain why. Because before COVID, I was working on a product as the first engineer. It was called Exponential, and this was in New Zealand. And basically, we were like culture amp, office vibes, early start kind of thing. And our first user base, like everything that we did, was basically law firms. It was because the CEO was basically a recruiter for a lot of these verticals. And so he knew people in this business, and he knew that there were huge retention issues. So we hadn't found a solution. Our goal was to figure it out. And, a big part of that was just surveys and all that kind of stuff. And I could see exactly what you're referring to. And one of the things that I definitely saw there was also just a general disengagement with the qualitative feedback. So you got the quantitative feedback, but let's face it, people just fudge those. They're looking at it, they're like, yeah, I'm a 3, I'm a 4, I don't care if it's higher or lower, whatever. But the qualitative feedback is where you really see it. It's either the absence of feedback, or the word vomit, or the thing that probably should have been a Glassdoor review. It's all absolutely useful. And the further that, when COVID hit, the first product that they would get rid of is basically any HR tech, right? Like, they were saving money. So all these potential customers that we had lined up, gearing up for a raise, all these things just fell apart, because every single company was like, well, that's just HR stuff. That's just surveys. We don't need that. We need to keep the business running. And to a point, I agree, like, you need to keep the business running. You can't survey employees if you don't have employees. But at the same time, it shows where HR tech sort of...
Yeah, it shows what they truly value, right, doesn't it? And I think, none more so than a services business where their people are their product. Like, it's not a SaaS business, right, where it's kind of like, yeah, well, the thing is going to keep running if the people are here or not, in some respects. But, if you people who, deliver the work and in order for you to make the money are not doing that, then fundamentally your business is threatened. So yeah, it's crazy to me that, And I'm sure that the legal, industry isn't the only one. I'm sure there's many of them, but that was just my experience, and clearly yours as well.
Yeah, it was a very depressing experience there, not just because of COVID, but also, seeing sort of this business also come to an end. The other thing I wanted to say, and it's such a perspective shift. You look at it as you're the enemy. You are the enemy. And when I say that, I'm like, there's a general thing that says HR is there for the business. They're not there for you. They're there to protect the business from you. And that is and look, I'm not going to say that is always the case, but it's not also not the case, right? Like there's definitely situations in companies,
it's a stereotype.
individuals. Yeah. And it's so like strange to also hear from your perspective that you are fighting for these features, these tools that are actually going to benefit people, but you're getting pushed not just because of a leadership choice, but also the bureaucracy of the choice, like the hoops that you have to jump through. So at the end of the day, like to answer your main question, there is yes, I do think these things that they put in front of you to slow you down or to make things more involved, or maybe it's really, really important to do it in the first place. But it definitely means that something that could have taken you a day and you could have gotten this instant dopamine hit, this to-do item that went from to-do to in progress to done is now to-do, in progress, in review. And it's in review for months and months and months. And then you finally get some degree of a response months later, but it is gone. Whatever context you had in your head, whatever ambition you had at that time is gone, because you're completely a different person every day, let alone every month. And it's very odd to assume that anyone could just easily pick up a ticket months later and be able to just continue on from that. So yeah, I just think every single one of those steps definitely helps create that burnout.
Yeah, the irony that I find in what you're talking about is that, often, and I feel like this is a fever pitch at the moment, being, we're recording this in December, and we'll probably go live early next year, but it's like, there's such a deep-throated, interest, desire, passion, whatever, for high performance and high performance cultures and efficiency and productivity right now more than ever. And it's obviously, it's our field, it's all these sorts of things. But people want, companies want high performance. Yeah. And yet the irony is that the high performers, the people that do go out of their way to come up with, novel solutions and they pursue it, and they're the kind of people that these companies want, they're kind of putting these obstacles in front of them and, preventing them from being successful in a way, and potentially, burning them out and causing them to be, just mediocre from an employee perspective. It's just, I don't even know what, if there's I don't think there's necessarily a question there, but it's more just an observation around the irony of companies that try to, through whether it's through standardization or whatever it is, they just, think, hey, this is going to make the process faster, but actually it just puts the handbrake on people who, maybe won't fit into the process and help a company kind of do what it purportedly wants to do.
I want to add to that because I feel like very often procedure is sort of demonized. And, you get into this stage where, okay, well, you got a high performing team. You should be able to just do it. You should be able to just go and just ship it. Like that ship it thing, man, it triggers me. When I hear it, it triggers me. My absolute favorite one is let's fucking go. Sorry, can I say that word there? Am I allowed to say that word?
Why not? Yeah.
Okay. All right. There's this idea that you should just do it, man. You just do it. But there's also sometimes a reason for a procedure, and it's there to sometimes protect the customer, or it's there to protect the business. But I think what makes it really difficult is when all these layers in between don't actually know what the dang procedure is. And so they're spinning in circles trying to figure it out. And it's kind of like when you call a travel agent back in the days when you had to call a travel agent and he said, I want to change this thing. I want to change this flight. Like, cool, I will talk to this person. Well, isn't your job to just do it? Like, why do you need to talk to this person? And so I don't think sometimes the procedure is the problem, because in healthcare, as much as startups like to say there's too much process, I'm like, no, that's good. You're dealing with my health data.
Yeah.
It should be too much process.
I'd like to process things.
Yeah. It's more a matter of like, that process is so ambiguous. It's so difficult to, this teenage social media thing going on right now in Australia, it's so hard to get clarity on it. It's so dang difficult. And that just means a whole bunch of people are just going to sit there twiddling their fingers, either making mistakes or not doing anything about it in the first place. So, yeah, I come to you with no solutions.
Well, no, but I think again, just speaking about what some of the things are that we think are constraints here, I think, you touch on, and I think you're right. It's not always the procedure. I think there's an apathy there as well. And, and in my example, I don't think it was that I was held back by procedure. I followed the procedure to try and get something approved, but I think there was an apathy from, whether it was the sort of head of my department or her boss, or his boss, about how it is that we can make things better, and there's kind of a reluctance of doing that. And I think that for me is something that can definitely, like, if it's felt at that level, we know that how much lead by example and all those sorts of things then start to ebb and flow through the rest of the business. But so I think bureaucracy can definitely be something that's smothering, but I think there's just that general apathy as well that others can have, and I'm sure there's many other catalysts. And actually, you touched on one that I wanted to come back to. You touched on something mostly sarcastically, I think, at the start, but with all of Australian sarcasm, there's always a grain of truth. But it was around this kind of like, the startups can only be successful, and I'd love to hear about how you think that brand and contributes to it, in the sense that do we always have to project this brand of success, and things can only be successful, and tell me more about that.
I mean, you mentioned at the start about LinkedIn. I don't know if that part was actually recorded, but that was mainly my reason for being on LinkedIn. There's a chronic positivity, and I'm not going to say that my feelings on this are correct. It could be that I'm just chronically negative. In fact, like a chronic depression, it's part of my whole thing. It's really difficult sometimes for people to actually say, my business failed. Someone will come to them, and man, I can literally, no, not literally, because it's happened so many times, I can't count it. They'll come to me and say, oh, it's not a failure. Like, you learned something. I'm like, well, yeah, I know I learned something, but like, can I not just say it was a failure?
Can we just focus on the failure?
Just let me just say it was a failure. And like, let me just, it's, and maybe I'm connecting dots that aren't necessarily related here, but I had this Substack post that I put out recently where I talked a little bit about, some of my depression, some of the things that I've done, or that, it's not very easy to talk about online. Now, if I put that content up, I have to use words that are, frankly, like childish. You cannot say this word. You cannot say that word. And again, an example is, I think you can't use the word anger or something like that on LinkedIn without getting one of those little notifications that says that this is, we've noticed messages like this tend to be, well, it's not necessarily anger itself, but like there's
but it's something like that.
A certain negativity, negativity in your content. Like if you said that, well, you're not a failure, or if you just said, well, you're a failure, sarcasm, you're most likely going to get that little tiny dialogue that says, so it doesn't understand nuance, right? Like this is AI. So it was definitely one of the reasons that I wanted to get on LinkedIn was to sort of express, yes, I did learn something, but I also learned that maybe entrepreneurship isn't always the answer to everything. It keeps being labeled as the answer to everything. And maybe that's just a symptom of LinkedIn. But in those 3 years when I was in that startup, I have no retirement monies to show for it. I really hurt my my health, like badly. And I developed probably the start of my burnout, like the genuine, absolute start of my burnout. That's kind of stayed with me since, in a way. And yes, I learned a lot. Would I change it? Yeah, actually would. I would change it.
I'd rather not have these things.
Yeah, I think it's just nice to sometimes reflect on what actually happened and not try to sugarcoat it and let people make their own decisions, because everyone's an adult. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah. Sorry, I'll take that one
Most
back.
of the time.
Yeah.
I agree completely. And I mean, you've obviously lived in many different cultures. I haven't. But certainly the concept of tall puppy syndrome gets spoken about a lot here, where there's a real fear of just sort of standing out, but also being separate from the herd. We were obviously, through COVID, very big adherents to rules. And we loved the rules in Australia. And I think, the person that's kind of different from the herd tends to be a little bit ostracized, or certainly I think it prohibits or limits our ability to acknowledge failures and things like that. How do you think some of this stuff, it obviously shows up at a societal level, LinkedIn, one of many social media channels. How do you think it shows up in an organization?
I think it makes it difficult for you to actually be honest in an organization, because if everything is relabeled as something other than what it really feels like to you, then it doesn't feel like you can be your honest self. I want to be able to go up to someone and say, I'm burnt out. I don't think this is a good idea. I think this is a bad idea. You shouldn't have to always reframe it in a certain way just to sound political or just to meet the prerequisites of this hyper stylized culture. It makes it difficult for people to just communicate and be themselves. And yeah, sure, I'm not saying you should jump into a company all hands and say, this is an absolute failure. You're all dumb, and then just mic drop and go. But you should at least be able to communicate with your managers and your most immediate manager and your team. And if you feel like you can't do that, then I don't even know why you have a manager.
Yeah, it ties into another really popular concept around psychological safety and having the ability to say, hey, I've stuffed up. No industries is it more important than medical and health industries, but being able to share when things haven't gone right, or to put your hand up and say, hey, I'm concerned about this or something like that. But I like kind of what you're saying, in the sense that it really, again, like most things, it needs to be role modeled from the top, and it needs to be shown that these things are okay, to help kind of create the trickle down effect, so that those conversations can happen at the team and the individual level, right?
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and say, look, this is what the CEO of Walmart needs to do, because I have no concept of what it's like to be leadership in a company that size. So I can only speak to, a company of less than 100. And in that kind of situation, I really want my leadership to actually say, we're hitting this problem. I don't need chronic positivity from you. I need honesty. And with that honesty comes this is what we're doing. This is why we're being proactive. This is what we're going to look at. And I think it goes a long way. Now, obviously, the larger the org, the more the personalities, you're not gonna accommodate everyone. I think there was this comedian I like to often quote, Patrice O'Neill, would say, in a comedy room, 50% of the crowd's going to love you and 50% of the crowd's going to hate you. I think that's a whole lot better than 100% of the crowd pretending they like you. So I will. Yeah, again, I don't know what this looks like in a larger org.
Yeah, but I feel like there's to sort of recap, I don't know, round the point on what you're saying there is we need to find a way to be more comfortable to comfortable to be ourselves in a way as well, right? And kind of be maybe a little bit more accepting of that and not feel this like, and again, LinkedIn's a great example, and it's an easy punching bag. It's just like everyone feels like they have to be their best selves, and there's so much like hustle porn, that sort of entrepreneurial culture, only successful, only ever made hundreds of millions of dollars, all that sort of stuff that I think just continues to create this thing of like, it's, I have to project success, and it has to resonate with everybody, and it has to, like, I have to please all people. I know certainly that's something I've grappled with throughout my entire career, isn't it? You kind of have to, maybe it's only experience is the only teacher that can give you the lesson, which is that you can only ever please some of the people some of the time, right? Like you can't ever make everyone happy. And it's just something that you have to acknowledge and accept.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask you something? So in the roles that you've had, have you worked with any engineering heavy organizations?
From a software perspective, yeah.
Yeah. And what have you noticed there, like in relation to what we're talking about? Is there anything that sort of stands out
with respect to burnout?
Burnout and maybe company culture. Very vague, very ambiguous. Like I'm
it's a big question. I think, a lot of the things that I think are true in most of them, which is that it's like, engineers tend not to, in my experience, love unnecessary bureaucracy. So I think, like, to your point before, like, a process is fine if it's a healthy process and if it helps us like deliver something more efficiently, where we don't need a lot of like change or divergence from the process. But I think where it's introduced and God, this is it's a humble teacher when you try to introduce something that is seen as being superfluous or unhelpful to an engineering team, because they will absolutely bluntly let you know what that is and why it's useless. And to be honest, I love that about that group of, again, the stereotype of that group of people, because it's definitely helped me be better at my job. And I literally wrote an article about this the other day, actually, but about job level frameworks. And I remember fondly a time where I tried to apply a job level framework that I had adopted from another company, and it was their job level framework, and I represented their companies, and tried to adopt it for an engineering company that I was working with, and very quickly found out that was never going to work, because it was for a different sized organization. It didn't speak to the kinds of roles that we had, and it just didn't resonate. People couldn't see themselves in it. And they weren't afraid to let you know. And so, for me, it was hard to accept, but it was good, because then I could go, okay, well, this clearly isn't right, and I need to now, evolve this into something that looks more like us. And the only way you can do that is by speaking to the people that it serves. And so definitely you'll know about it.
Engineers definitely have their own version of that, where you'll go into, this is a little bit of a joke, but I've always found, when you've hired a new CMO, when you've got a new brand for your company, or when you've hired a new CTO or CPO, if you've got a whole different product lineup, or you know what I mean? Like, suddenly there's a giant restructuring of responsibilities and ideas and features and processes. And engineers similarly have the same issue, where they'll take something that maybe worked in a previous company, or in a very well-to-do company like Google, which loves to have its engineers write blogs. And you'll read that, you'll listen to a couple of podcasts and blah, 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 and you're going to have these engineers come into your organization, and they're going to try to bring their ideas in and their processes in. And that's how you have Jira. That's how you end up with something that doesn't necessarily work for that organization. And engineers, again, such a stereotype, but they love systems and they hate systems. It's a dichotomy. And I have always found that often it comes at the expense of them not understanding the domain they're in. So yeah, you're right in that, it's good to get that feedback from engineers. But I always want to challenge that and ask, what is it specifically that you didn't like about it? Because if they can't answer that, then I'm kind of like, you're having an emotional reaction to this process. And I say that because this is also an aspect of engineering burnout isn't always from the top down. It's also within the organizer, within your team. You will have these like 10x rockstar engineers, which, folks like Elon Musk love to harp on about, is like, yeah, glorify. And what they do to the team is also just as bad as what a bad leader does to the team, because they create this idea of what this is how it should be. This is how it's going to be. And they remove the ability to democratize or even, communicate, a lot of the problems within that, because you have a heavy personality. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of leads into that concept. I think I don't know if it was Netflix or somewhere else, that, the concept of the brilliant jerk, someone who's like obviously very good at their job, but generally has a negative impact on others, or maybe goes about it in a way that negatively impacts others and kind of brings the average down rather than raising it and so on. So yeah, I hear you. And it's kind of like potentially one of the concepts, and it's a good segue actually to the last question that I wanted to touch on with you. We kind of talked about some of the catalysts, whether it's bureaucracy or apathy, which I think could be quite contagious in organizations, or if it's, chronic positivity or a lack of ability to, have safety in sharing failures or losses or concerns or something like that. You talked about, it's from a top-down perspective, and it can also be at a team level as well. Where do you see there being a personal responsibility? Like me as an employee, what's my responsibility to either, not get burnout or not burn out, or not create burnout and the conditions for it in my team, versus a company and some of the things that they should be doing to ensure that their people don't suffer that?
Yeah, that's such a, oh man, I wish you hadn't left this one to the very last
That's
minute.
Part two, is it?
There's it really does feel like a part two, right? Because you're right that there is so much personal responsibility, and it's very easy to blame others. But they're only part of the problem. Sometimes the problem's also, sometimes you yourself are part of the problem as well. And I've noticed if I burn out of 6 organizations, what's the common denominator? Because not all of those 6 organizations are that bad. So the common denominator is me. And I've suddenly burnt out of, there's some organizations where I haven't burnt out. And I've noticed what the difference is. And the difference is, I'll give you an example of a situation I was in where it was a very big company here, and I didn't feel like I was suited to the role because, oh gosh, look at this giant company with all these millions of dollars, and little old me with my early stage startup experience, I'm not going to be suited for this. And so during this great COVID period, I figured, but this company is going to offer me a lot of money to be basically not a senior engineer. I can just kind of relax a little. I can chill. I can learn from these people. And I took this job. I sat in it and I realized, oh, wow, I really could chill. I really could relax. And
Rest and best, baby.
I think what are the Gen Zs call it, quiet quitting, right? Or something like that. But it's not my personality. I just couldn't. I kept seeing things that I wanted to do. The environment was unique because now there's terabytes of data. There's opportunities to work in a different team. There's access to tools I never would have had before. There's access to people with skill sets I never would have met. And so now I'm just sort of, I'm going to run an initiative around mental health. Oh, I'm going to run a hackathon. Oh, I'm going to do that. Why? For the love of God, man, you wanted to start this thing to chill. But there's a personality trait in me. I want to do these things because I'm genuinely curious and I want to do it. Now, leadership didn't say, Nav, you got to do this. There's probably some responsibility on managers to say, Nav, you shouldn't be doing that. And that wasn't there. But I was there and I made quite a few mistakes myself. So being able to know yourself. If you know you're a certain personality type and you can catch yourself going down a certain road, I think that's really important.
So it's that's kind of like your own personal responsibility. Ambition, like
yeah.
Yeah, like
what do you
obviously-
really want?
Yeah, it's definitely something I think, you again, before the recording started, you asked me kind of how I'm feeling coming out of the holiday and things like that. It's something going into 2026 I'm really conscious of is checking my propensity to get in, to do more than I probably reasonably could in a healthy way is make sure that I'm not, letting my excitement and I had shiny object syndrome. But I also have developed a better ability to finish the things that I start. So what ends up happening is that I get, excited by 50 things and then I try to finish them all. And of course that's no good for anybody. I like that in terms of like checking your own ambitions around, understanding it, but also being kind to yourself in a way that you don't take on so much that you do cause your own burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, your manager should be able to catch these things. They should be able to see, now if you're taking on too much work, you're working late, you're working, you're making a few too many bugs. I'm not blaming you. I'm just like, let's have a chat about this. What is it? Do you think we could actually like push some things out of your plate? And if they can preemptively see that as well. And look, managers in some of these orgs, they have their own stresses. They're not your therapist. And I have a draft blog post about this. Your manager isn't your therapist, not even your mentor necessarily. They're your manager. So maybe we put a little bit too much on them sometimes. And, there's a little cyclical loop there where like, if you make your manager burnt out, they're going to make you burnt out. It just happens, if they can't accommodate you, you have to accommodate yourself. And then everyone's just going to burn out. The room is just going to smell of smoke and burnt toast.
So if I'm hearing it, it's like the tip for personal responsibility is basically check yourself before you wreck yourself. Understand your limits so that you don't put yourself in an environment where you do cause your own burnout. And then on sort of the company side of things, it's like for managers, like just, I guess, first and foremost, just kind of care about and be aware of your people. And then sort of secondly, be prepared to speak up. I've got maybe one small story here, but before we wrap things up around, I very much saw a lot of these sorts of things in a direct report of mine from a few years ago where, they were working a lot of hours, took way too many things on, all that sort of stuff. And I had that kind of question where I was like, hey, like I'm starting to get a bit worried. I think you're doing, too much and a lot. And their response was actually, for me, I feel like I'm in a great environment. I'm feeling productive. I know I'm doing a lot and I'm working a lot, but I'm so like deeply interested and engaged in the work that I'm doing. And at the point in time, they didn't have a family or family commitments and things like that. They were just they loved their job, which is the most any manager or any company could ever hope for. And they said the moment that like they appreciated me checking in, and they said the moment that that I'll be having an issue is when I feel like, almost to my point earlier at my previous example, when I feel like I'm not seeing progress, or I feel like I'm being halted from progress or something like that, is typically their own reflection of when burnout may creep in. So it was it's recognizing that actually sometimes there are just people who just want to do like stupid, insane, crazy amounts of work, and you need to keep an eye on it. But it isn't always a kind of contributor to burnout for them until maybe their ability to do that is actually hampered as well. So it's again, I think it just comes back to like just have a conversation, just care, just ask, and kind of go from there, right? It's like we don't have to systematize everything too deeply beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's not a very easily quantifiable thing. I've seen leadership courses where, one of the biggest things I have, pet peeves of mine maybe, is as soon as I put a fractional or whatever, as soon as I put a C-suite title on my byline or my job thing, I just started having all these people saying like, oh, would you like some leadership coaching? And I remember like reading one of them, and it was something like, lean in when the person's talking to you, have a conversation. And I thought, wow, am I spending $500 for this? Like, I think it comes down to being human, and I will say, like, one of the reasons, and like, not everyone has the same experiences, like you've sort of pointed out earlier, that the cultural differences and things like that. But at the end of the day, I really like to think that everyone can have a degree of empathy and be able to communicate one-on-one with someone without an ulterior motive, without a grand ambition of some kind. And if you're a manager, you're managing humans. And if you're managed by a manager, you're managed by a human. And I don't know where that doesn't, come across sometimes.
Yeah, we forget that sometimes in the throes of the startup culture, entrepreneurial journeys, whatever, right? The 100 million ARR stories that are always dominating our feed. No, I hear you.
Yeah, annual revenue, huh? I wonder how much of that is profit.
Doesn't matter. Well, mate, this has been good. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's I'm sure that it will help a fair few people, identify it or at least potentially resolve it for themselves or for others within the organization. So I appreciate you taking the time and thanks for joining me.
No, I appreciate you letting me come on. I love talking about this stuff because every time I talk about it, I kind of have a reflection myself. So it's like one of those weird little moments where like it's only when you talk to someone else about it, you kind of like capture this little tiny thing and you're like, oh, hey, and I just remembered that scenario that I put myself through. And maybe I should reflect the next time I have a direct report. So I really enjoy that. And I also think that, and maybe this is also a post that I made on LinkedIn once. I make many rants on LinkedIn where I thought there's just way too much talk about founder burnout. Like for crying out loud. Like they've had their time, Like there's no 30 under 30 product designer in a startup. There's no 30 under 30 support engineer in a startup. You know what I mean? Like I don't think people in a startup that aren't the founder get enough attention, because I'm working on a social media product right now. Maddie, who is handling a lot of our dialogue and community things. Not everyone's a nice person, and they deal with a lot. When you're connected to a customer, you're dealing with their complaints. You're dealing with so much, and I just think that maybe I love any kind of opportunity to speak to the people who aren't founders in an early stage startup, because they're just as important as the person who makes it on a list.
If not more.
I think that. I am biased, but yeah.
I love it. All right, mate. Well, with that, we will leave it there. Thank you again for joining me. And
part 2, right? We're going to do a part 2 and we're going to start a podcast. And
50 parts. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Thanks, buddy.
All righty.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Foundation Series. Make sure to head over to our website to subscribe to the Foundation Series for monthly editions featuring future interviews on startup compensation. In each edition, we'll explore the different strategies, trends, and challenges faced by startups around the world. If you have a burning topic you'd like me to cover or a standout guest that you want to hear from, drop me an email so I can dive deeper into the compensation topics that matter most to you. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and practices driving success in global tech startups around the world. Thanks for listening.